Today I want to talk to you guys about compression ratio. Compression ratio is something that a lot of you have heard about, but a lot of people don't really understand it. Now, when we're building engines and trying to modify an engine, the compression ratio of the engine is really important. One of the big aspects of compression ratio is we want the compression ratio to be as high as possible to get more power. However, we are limited by the type of fuel we're going to run. Now, if you're going to run pump gas, 87, 91 octane, whatever, 91 is the one we're usually going to look at because we can buy that. It costs a little more than 87, but that's going to get our compression up a little higher to where it's livable. You guys have all seen factory cars, like my wife has a Lexus, and it says premium fuel only. That's because it has higher compression. One of the things that we try to do is get the compression up to the point where it's going to make good power, but if we're going to run pump gas, we have to keep it to a level where we're not going to have pre-ignition. What happens if you have too much compression, you have to run higher octane fuel. Now, octane in a fuel is literally the fuel's resistance to burning. So a higher octane fuel is going to take more heat to ignite that fuel. The problem with going too high of a compression with pump gas is the heat that is generated in there by the compression of the air and fuel is going to reach ignition temperature. So what happens is before the spark plug actually fires, the fuel ignites and you get what we call pre-ignition. Now, pre-ignition is really bad. It can destroy engines. Here's a good example of that. Had a customer several years ago bring me an engine, and he had some random guy build this engine for him. He paid him a bunch of money and he got the thing in and it never ran right. It spark knocking and pinging and it had all kinds of issues. He got about 150 to 200 miles on it and the thing just wouldn't even run. It was smoking and using oil and backfiring, and it had no power. So he brought me the engine, and I have one of the pistons here that I took out of that engine. I want you to take a good look at this. This is only with about 150 miles on that engine. It literally melted that piston. This is caused by pre-ignition. Now, what happened with this engine is the guy that built it, because he didn't really understand what he was doing, he had an extra set of heads there, and he said, oh, you know what, they're small block Chevy heads. We'll just use these because they're good heads and yours are junk or whatever. So the heads that they took off was a standard 350 head. This is just a cutaway of a 350 head. It had a 76 cc chamber head here. Now, the combustion chamber is part of that compression ratio equation, like we'll learn about in a little bit. What he did is they took a set of 305 HO heads, which had a 58 cc chamber head here. So we went from 76 cc's, and this was much tighter, much smaller, 58. Well, I ran the numbers on it, and with that 58 cc chamber on a 30 over 350, which is what this is, even with a recessed piston, he had about 11.2 to 1 compression. Now, he was expecting to run this in his work truck with 87 octane. Well, if you run 11.2 to 1 compression with iron heads on 87 octane, this is what you get. So we got to watch our compression ratio, because if the customer or you are planning on running pump gas, you know, if you're going to run race gas, no problem, but it's $8 to $10 a gallon. So most people don't want to do that. So we got to watch our compression ratio. So compression ratio is literally this. It is the volume difference between bottom dead center and top dead center. So in other words, when my piston is at its lowest point of travel in the cylinder, how much space is above that piston? And that includes the combustion chamber on the head. The other volume that we're comparing is when this piston goes up to top dead center, how much space is above that piston at top dead center, which is basically the space above the piston at top dead center is your deck clearance. That's how far down in the bore the piston sits. It's the gasket thickness, because remember, the gasket thickness is controlling where that head sits. A thicker gasket is going to move the head further away from the top of the piston and make that area bigger. A thinner gasket is going to move the head and the chamber closer to the piston. It's going to make this area smaller. So we have to consider the gasket thickness, the deck clearance, and the combustion chamber volume. All of those are the equation in here. So I'm literally looking at the area above the piston. How much area do I have, including the gasket thickness in the chamber? and then I'm running this up to TDC, and I'm saying, when I'm at top dead center, this chamber area, how much area do I have above the piston? It's a ratio. So this area up here where the combustion chamber is, if it takes 10 of these to fill up this area, then the compression ratio is obviously 10 to 1. Now, the factors that control it are this: the top of the piston. This is a flat top piston. It has a flat top with 4 valve release. This is a dished piston. It has 4 valve release, but you can see it has a big recess here. It has about a 14.5 cc recess. So this piston here is going to add 14.5 cc's to this area up here, which is going to make it larger, which is going to lower the compression ratio. Now, if I'm really doing a performance motor and I want to beef that up, I can get a dome piston. Now, this is going to make that area, when it comes up, the area up here is going to be much smaller. So I'm pushing the same volume into a much smaller area, which is going to raise the compression ratio. So compression ratio is really a comparison of volume above the piston at bottom dead center and volume above the piston at top dead center. Now, we have to measure these things each one at a time in order to calculate this. So here's what you need to know. You need to know the bore size of your engine. You need to know the stroke of the crank, so you need to know how far that piston is going to travel from bottom to top. We need to know our combustion chamber volume. We need to know our compressed gasket thickness. Now again, we can get different thicknesses of gasket. This gasket here is 45 thousandths compressed. This one is a steel shim gas, 15 thousandths compressed. So there's a dramatic difference between these two gaskets. So you can pick and choose what gasket you want. We want to keep this around 9.5, 10 to 1 with iron heads on pump gas. So if you're building a street 350 and you want to run pump gas, these are all things that you need to consider. If you're changing heads like we did on our 350 here, if you go from a 76 cc chamber to a 64 cc chamber, that's going to change some stuff. It's going to raise your compression. Now, generally on a stock 350, going from 76 to 64 is not going to put you out of pump gas range, mainly because the 350 with the open chamber, and if it has a dished piston, most of them have a dish like this, they're like 8 to 1 compression from the factory. So if you put on a set of 64 cc's, then you're going to be fine. But if you do machine work like deck the block and machine the heads and put a thinner gasket on, things like that, you got to really watch this. You might get out of pump gas range. So all of this stuff has to be checked. We have to CC the combustion chambers. We have to know our bore and stroke. We have to know our gasket thickness. There's actually a really good calculator online once you know these numbers. It's called RSR compression ratio calculator. Just type that into Google and it'll ask you for all these parameters, and once you know that, it will tell you what your compression ratio is. But you can't just randomly slap this stuff together, because if you do, you're going to you could get yourself in a lot of trouble, or you could have compression that's so low your engine is just weak and it's just not going to work.
An engine's compression ratio can be a guide to the power it can generate. It's not always obvious whether one engine is bigger than the other. The size of the engine block can be misleading. Two blocks can be the same size, but one has cylinders bored out to larger volumes. The standard measure of size is called displacement. Displacement is the volume a piston displaces in the cylinder as it moves from its lowest point, or bottom dead center, to its highest point, top dead center. This is also called swept volume. Notice that displacement does not include the volume above top dead center. Engine size is then the sum of the displacements of all the cylinders of the engine. It is called total engine displacement. For this engine, it is 2 litres. Another guide to engine power is compression ratio. It compares two volumes in the cylinder. One is swept volume plus clearance volume. That's the volume above top dead center. The other is the clearance volume only. Putting these volumes into a ratio gives us the compression ratio, 6 to 1. The larger the first volume and the smaller the second, the higher the engine's compression ratio, and the more powerful the engine.